quality of information that people are receiving, as well as this impression, factionalized elites here, that the government is not representative of the people, or is controlled by a very small group of corrupt politicians, or by an individual family, or even an individual person, for example. The ecological threat register is one new report which we started producing last year, almost as an experiment. But what it does is it basically measures the country's exposure to a variety of ecological threats, so things like food security, water stress, population growth, and their exposure to a variety of forms of natural disasters, including droughts and floods and hurricanes, et cetera, et cetera. So here you can see kind of sort of some of those countries, the red ones being the most exposed. If we look at regional food security, we can see how North America and Europe are, in a relatively luxurious position. We can say that 60% of all food insecurity is currently in sub-Saharan Africa. So we estimate that 2 billion people in the world currently face food insecurity, and that by 2050, that's going to increase to 3.5 billion people. Now, I can't have the gallery view on, so I apologize if anybody's been lifting up their hands for questions. I haven't seen any of it. And Chris, if I'm not mistaken, I'm just going to plow on through, and then we'll open it up for general discussion and questions. Is that right?
That sounds good, Michael.
Okay, great. So this is a tiny slide related to water stress. And as we can see, the Middle East and Northern Africa have got significant water problems. There's now globally 60% less fresh water available than there was in the 1960s. And developed countries use 10 times more water than developing countries do. The number of water-related conflicts has also significantly increased in the last decade. In fact, it's more than doubled. It's about 270%. So that's definitely something to pay attention to as well. In fact, I was reading. This is somewhat anecdotal, but I was watching the movie about The Big Short, and about the millionaire who invested in the stock market, and when the housing crashed, he made a lot of money and stuff like that. And I noted at the end of the movie that it said that his single investment moving forward was going to be in water and land with water. So we do foresee that that's going to be a significant issue. Also, population growth. In some of the countries with the highest levels of conflict, there is also significant population growth. 17 countries in sub-Saharan Africa are going to be doubling their population in the next 30 years. So if you think of that in terms of food security and water stress, growing population is one more ecological threat that really kind of sort of adds or can add to those conflict dynamics as well. We see that countries with high levels of peacefulness, their population growth significantly decreases. In fact, in the most developed, most peaceful societies, we're actually expecting population to decrease by 2% in the next 30 years, whereas we see it likely to significantly increase in the least peaceful countries. And then I'd like to kind of sort of end in some ways with this slide related to sort of food security. When we explore of all of these correlations, one of the things, and I forgot to mention this, one of the things that the Ecological Threat Register does is, number one, it measures countries' exposure to the ecological threats I mentioned. But then another thing that it does is it cross-references that with countries' level of positive peace. Now, if you've read the report, you'll see how countries with higher levels of positive peace are more resilient to a variety of forms of crisis, right? And as you can see in this chart here, are significantly more food secure, just to give you one example. So by cross-referencing countries' exposure to these threats with their level of resilience, you can actually identify which are the countries that are most vulnerable, and therefore target those to be able to build positive peace. So for example, this is the map that you saw at the beginning for the Ecological Threat Register, where you see countries' exposure to threats. And this slightly different map that you see here is countries' vulnerability to threat. These countries here that you see in the dark red, this is sub-Saharan Africa here. This is kind of sort of the southern African belt, and this is South Asia, including Afghanistan, Pakistan. are all countries that not only have high levels of exposure, but also have very low levels of positive peace as well. So these are what we call ecological hotspots and places in which we should, as a humanity, if you will, be dedicating significant resources to. They're resource scarce, they've got high population growth, they're also tremendously unpeaceful or in conflict at the moment. So something to consider. Some of these countries we are already paying significant attention to, some of them have been completely forgotten. So I kind of just wanted to sort of end on positive peace because I know that that's what this whole course is sort of about. And some of my key takeaways, I mean, my sort of trip here has been somewhat transformational for me. Chris mentioned that I come from the development sector, originally in construction. I wasn't born a peace builder, so this has been a learning experience for me. But one of the things that I appreciated about the pillars was the systemic nature of them and the way that all of the pillars are interact and how I can kind of sort of relate to that when I see the world around me. When I think about how something may impact another pillar, it does seem very intuitive to me. One of the things that really makes me feel comfortable is that to the best extent that we have available, this is demonstrated or shown through the research that we do. It's not just a framework that we pulled out of our sleeve and said, hey, this is the ultimate panacea. The other thing that really intrigued me about the pillars of positive peace is the fact that it is a framework that is applicable or potentially applicable in any kind of system, independently of the size. You can think of it at the nation state level, and we do that through the report that you saw, but you can also think of it at the community level as well. And I think that that is what most of this course is about how we can sort of use the pillars of positive peace to be able to develop peace building projects, or to be able to simply just understand our local world around us and how our individual small actions can contribute to higher levels of positive peace. So just opening up, before opening up for questions and having discussions, I just wanted to add, somebody mentioned they've been to the website already. It's kind of a one-stop shop. All of our reports are there for free. You can download them. You can access the Positive Peace Academy as well. You can become an IEP ambassador. There's articles that we have of our ambassadors of different peace building work around the world as well. So we welcome you to the IEP website. And of course, if you want to join us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, etc., we'd love to see you there as well. So with that, I'd love to open it up for questions and debate and discussion and anything that the team wants to talk about.
Thanks very much, Michael.
Sue, please go ahead.
I'd like to ask what methods, if any, that you have of taking this wonderful study and knowledge to various governments, our own included.
Yes, so that is actually a large part of my role, I have to say, here in the United States, but also throughout the Americas too. We've had a modicum of success, although that just to give you one example, the actual Pillars of Positive Peace framework has been adopted by the regional Philippine government. They had some success using the Pillars of Positive Peace to analyze and look at their existing counterterrorism efforts. Have you mentioned this to anybody, Chris? Did you give this example? Okay, so they in the state of Mindanao in the Philippines, they've been fighting Islamist militants for over 40 years. And they had been relatively unsuccessful. A lady called Santiago, Irene Santiago, became an IEP ambassador, attended a Positive Peace workshop, and actually took some of this and evaluated the existing counterterrorism efforts. One of the things that she saw was that there was very little work being done on the element of free flow of information. And they decided to open up a hotline that they called Police 911, which enabled villagers and people in the community to be able to call up and report on the level of fighting, report on exactly what was happening, reporting on whether they thought there was an incident that could take place, so that everybody had a better idea of exactly what was going on, and there could be this mutual support network. What ended up happening is that the militants actually ended up using this helpline to surrender. And when asked about why they had decided to call that particular helpline, what they said was, Well, previously there had been no real feasible way for us to be able to go through this process. If we'd walked into a military barracks, if we'd walked into a police department, for example, we would have been shot and killed on the spot or something worse. We had no idea. This provided us with the channel, the communications channel that we needed to be able to surrender. Um, I don't want to say that Positive Peace was responsible for that or IP was responsible for that. We weren't. But the important thing is that there was a very small, almost anecdotal change that was made that significantly altered the system in the long run. So of course we do a lot of promotion of that work. We've done some preliminary work with the government with the municipalities in Northern Ireland. It's very difficult to talk about any form of peace in Washington, D.C. So that's been my mission for the last couple of years. Any recommendations that the team may have, of course, are extremely welcome. We do have contacts with a couple of congressmen. I present on a regular basis to the State Department, to USAID. We present results from the Global Terrorism Index, also to the State Department, to NYPD as well. So we're working on it. So.
I had something that I wanted to ask. Is this an opportunity?
Certainly is, man.
Okay, thank you. I'm Brenda. There were a couple of things that I was interested in. One is that the issue around the violence, there was a suicide. I can't remember what the screen was, but it had suicide, homicide, and then it had internal and external military. And it seemed to me, I'm a psychotherapist, so it may be that I'm viewing it from a different perspective, but it seemed to me that was a very masculine way of looking at what violence was within the context of societies. Like, why is there not perhaps a mental health aspect to all of this? Because that would certainly intervene on the need for the amount of military and the number of suicides and the number of homicides. And certainly, you know, there's been a lot of movement around wanting to reassign some of the police responsibilities to mental health workers who are likely able to diminish the numbers of suicides and homicides, both within and external to the police department and to the military, because there's a lot of suicide in the military, a lot of suicide in police, a lot of trauma, a lot of unresolved issues. So where is the mental health aspect there?
Mm-hmm.
Is that being investigated by this movement, your affiliation?
Excellent. So there's a couple of things I'd say. First, with regards to the mental health element, I am actually quite familiar with that because we're doing some work in the United States right now, developing a police and peace report. You know, one of the challenges of interactions between police and the community are specifically along the lines of mental health. You know, on one side, police's inability to be able to deal with it appropriately. The second is the question of whether the police should be the people dealing with it, and how and if and when they should be supported in being able to do it better. One of the reasons that we don't talk about
Can I also say, and also mental health of the police?
Yes,
I'm also advocating for that.
that's a very good point.
Okay.
That's a very good point. One of the reasons that we don't track it in the Global Peace Index is because mental health as an issue is not violence, right? The outcome, if you will, of mental health. So, for example, a violent act is the equivalent of a use of force. The Global Peace Index doesn't measure the reason why things happen. It just measures the level to which things happen. Does that make sense?
It does, but it's actually a really, in my mind, a very male-oriented way of doing things. I'm not sure how many women were involved in this research, but it seems a very male-oriented aspect. That's not to be offensive, it's just my impression.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. The element of mental health is something that relates a lot more to the positive peace framework, rather to the way that we measure the global Global Peace Index. That pie that you
Mhm.
that you saw there, and the element related to violence does include sexual violence, for example. So that is all included in there. But mental health is not a measure of violence. So that's why it's not included in that. Hi.
Okay,
Well,
I'm going to introduce that it should be.
so how would that happen? Let's
Well, I
say,
can't imagine people initiating something violent if their mental health was good. Somebody who is healthy and feeling self-satisfied and content with their lives would have fewer reasons to exert any kind of violence on anybody.
so would it be, would we add the number of people with mental health issues as a
Well,
point
I think possibly, or the mental health issues that we're promoting these particular acts of violence, like the need for power is a mental health issue because truthfully we live in a very chaotic, unpredictable world. That's what being alive means.
Hand up.
Understood.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Brenda.
I had one other comment I wanted to ask, just if this is accurate throughout the world. You said as the population population increases most in countries where violence is most. Do you think that is as a consequence to the number of people who die within the content of that violence?
Yes, it is. It's directly related to child mortality.
Okay.
Helen?
Well, I can understand how you have, come up with these statistics in terms of just what happens if someone dies, or, if there's a riot or whatever. You're just tabulating those numbers. But I think where Brenda's coming from is an approach or thinking about how do you solve these problems? And if you don't look at the root causes, then you can't solve them. So I'm really interested in the role of this peace project in actually promoting solutions, or is that not your mandate within what you're doing?
Well, one of the reasons I haven't talked about this is because actually the whole course and what Chris is going to be presenting you and what you're going to be discussing is specifically about the solution. So at IUP, our mission is to make the planet more prosperous and peaceful, at least for the majority of the people on the planet. That's our mission, and most, if not the entirety of our work, comes down to better understanding positive peace. What are the attitudes, institutions, and structures that create and sustain peaceful societies? Appropriate ways to deal with mental health issues being one of those. This is the positive peace line of our work. But in order to be able to understand what the most peaceful countries have in common, right, we first need to understand what are the most peaceful countries. So we started with a measure of negative peace, which is what I presented today, as well as some additional research. But from that, what we learn, what we try and understand is, okay, well, what is it that creates the peaceful society? All of our research then feeds into these 8 pillars of positive peace that you see. In other words, all of this research that you see, that you saw here today, when you stick all of that together in a ball and you squeeze it, what comes out the bottom is that the most peaceful countries on earth have a well-functioning government, an equitable distribution of resources, free flow of information, high levels of human capital, good relations with neighbors, sound business environment, low levels of corruption and acceptance of the rights of others. And that includes being able to deal with mental health, that includes indigenous relations, that includes racial equity, that includes gender equity. Now, it should be said that it's also tremendously culturally specific. So a well-functioning government may mean something completely different in one country than the next. A well-functioning government in the United States means a US Congress, right? In some other country, it may mean a group of elders sitting around an acacia tree. Acceptance of the rights of others may mean something very different in a multicultural society, as opposed to a Muslim conservative society, as opposed to a matriarchal society, or a society based on the caste system. One of the key things here is that whenever we try and move any one of these systems too fast, independently of how much we agree or we disagree with it, we end up breaking the system. And one of the things that often happens is that we take a moral viewpoint about what's right and what's wrong. We try and transplant that into another community or another culture, and we break the system and it devolves into violence. So my background is in development, and often, very often, and still today, what you see is an international development organization coming into the country with their own ideals of what is appropriate, what is not appropriate, what should be done, what should not be done. And that creates more conflict within the system. And also they do things like concentrate on a single pillar without really understanding how benefiting that pillar can actually can create havoc in the others. Just to give you one example of that, yesterday I was speaking with the warden of a prison in Medellin called Bella Vista, and they'd started a program there to be able to of restorative justice, and to be able to provide training to the different members of the gangs that were incarcerated there. And they were able to establish a wing in which they did a whole variety of projects. They were provided with kind of sort of television, reprieve, and training and education, providing that they agreed to put down their weapons and stop buying and selling drugs within the prison. So that was all fine and dandy, and it worked in the beginning, but it had to close down because because all the guards refused to work. Why? Because the guards made a lot of money by the drug transactions happening in the prison. So what that particular project hadn't taken into account the fact that there is a whole set of dynamics within a socioeconomic system that need to be taken into account if you don't want to break it. And you can go in there with very clear ideas about what needs to be done, but if you don't have that systemic multi-pillar understanding and understand how all of these things work together, and you bring all of this system, all of it together slowly along, then you're not going to be able to achieve those outcomes in peacefulness that you want.
This makes me think about the poppy growing in Afghanistan, and how important that was to the local economies for the farmers growing poppies. And then the US came in and wanted to just cancel all that, and I thought, no, why don't they just buy the product? I mean, it doesn't really matter what they do with it, although it probably could be used beneficially in North American or wherever European society, but that's just an example I can think of upsetting the balance in one area.
That's a wonderful example, Helen, I have to say. Yeah, sorry, I have you as elder college,
Yeah.
elder college Delta Society. Yeah.
And I take my role as an elder seriously. My name is Guillermo. Now, when you use indicators, are those indicators ones that you created, or are those general indicators? And I tell you why. The other day, for example, China announced that they have eliminated extreme poverty. And when you look at the indicator, their indicator of extreme poverty was $360 a year. Well, yeah.
Yeah. So Guillermo, that's great, and that really speaks to some of the challenges of being able to do this work. Sometimes we actually get criticized for not doing more work or for not concentrating on a particular theme or a particular subject. But the truth is that it's incredibly difficult to be able to find globally comparable data on even the most basic things. I mean, I was talking briefly about our work in the US with police departments. You probably knew this because you're closer to the US. It was somewhat shocking to me as a European. It turns out that there are 18,000 police departments in the United States, and none of them talk to each other. They've all got completely different standards, even for things like information, sort of ways about reporting crime and homicides, right? So even in one of the most developed countries, it's tremendously difficult to come across. Just going back to sexual violence before, not only is it not tracked in many, many different countries, but the definition of rape, for example, can be completely different in different countries. So, you know, it's already significantly different between the US and Canada. So trying to find these indicators in the way that you say, Guillermo, that are globally comparable are tremendously, tremendously difficult. It's tremendously difficult. Now, we use public sources, and then we complement that with qualitative data from experts as and when we can to be able to fill those gaps. It's not perfect, but it is the best picture that we have given the data that we have available.
Michael?
Yes, Colin.
Yeah. I had highlighted a certain section in the executive summary, which you've more than touched on. But one of the things that I read in here was in particular that concerted efforts in the areas of education could sometimes bring about problematic consequences. I think about a lot of the fundraising even, or the efforts that are made in the Western world to establish schools, to support education in sub-Saharan Africa, the importance of girls attending school in Afghanistan. It became a symbol for societal sort of progression or evolution. Any comments about that, and whether that is necessarily the most effective way to sort of intervene and enable people or whatever?
Yeah. My comments are sort of anecdotal and probably kind of more personal than representative of IEP.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'd say is that, you know, in terms of pillars, things like well-functioning government, low levels of corruption, and quality of information are perhaps the three that we see strongly most correlated. Or we see that through the research. But that does not mean that one should fixate on those as the kind of sort of the outcome, because what we see is that is not the case. When you do fixate on one of those, independently of their correlation, if you don't take the rest of the system with it, then you do not get the outcomes that you want. And I say that because even though I think yes, education in the same way as healthcare is something that is completely universal and without any question significantly beneficial, you also need to consider the environment in which you are trying to make it take place. For example, if you think of Boko Haram, if you think of some of the challenges that France is going through right now with regards to national identity and their criticism of how somehow there are kind of sort of American influences that are sort of altering or challenging national identity. I mean, these are two very developed countries that have completely different views on how education should happen, right? And what should be included. So, you know, when we take those things into account, yes, but it also needs to be, these efforts need to be highly contextualized, and you need to be very careful about how you go about it and introduce it in a way that once again helps, you know, supports all of these pillars in order for it to be adopted, accepted, and for the whole system to be able to transition forward.
So the parents, you know, made the decision to pull their girls out of school because of the Boko Haram and that, are making, well, the right decision on the spot. But then how do you deal with the situation? You know, it has been used as an ideal place to go and grab and kidnap children wholesale for their purposes.
Well, I mean, one thing that immediately sort of occurs to me is obviously there's a significant mismatch between what these people believe and what is delivered at the school, or what they think should be delivered at the school. And that is not something completely alien to the United States, for example. I'm not exactly sure what the situation is in Canada, I have to say, but there are significantly different opinions about what it is that should be taught in schools in the United States. I mean, if you just take the recent conversation about racial equity and the need to include that in the curriculum, you know, with regards to to the history of the United States, I mean, it's a country divided on a theme that one would think is something that is completely universal. So a key aspect here is, well, what are the particular educational themes and content that we can all agree upon, right? And can that be used as a way of creating that joint vision of what education should be? So what is it that a Boko Haram mother or father needs or would like their children to receive, or what is the information that they would benefit from that could be provided that would then kind of sort of increase or help increase their acceptance? Guillermo, go ahead.
A little bit piggybacking on Paulette and Brenda, the definitions are quite important when you're trying to measure something. And for example, what is the definition of good governance? Is it the same for us as it is for China, let's say? Like, for example, today, the Communist Congress adopted a law about Hong Kong that many of us will consider abhorrent. But is our conceptual of governance the same as theirs? What is good governance for Chinese?
So the measures that we use for the positive peace index, which tries to provide a very specific number and a very specific definition of well-functioning government, which is essentially one that provides good quality public services, one that ensures rule of law, but also one that ensures a peaceful transition of power, right? To name just a few characteristics, are based on those that we have found to be more universally applicable, in the sense that they correlate for most of the countries that we include in the positive peace index, China being one positive peace index. And I don't know exactly where China falls on its particular well-functioning government score, probably relatively low, I imagine. So we do use very specific metrics there. But one of the things that I kind of like to go back to is this notion, and it is a bit of a leap of faith, but this notion that it can mean different things in different places, and that is okay. A well-functioning government will be different depending on whether you're in a tropical country, whether you're in a Nordic country, whether you're in a multicultural country, whether you're in a homogeneous country. The government, the makeup of the government, the characteristics and the services that it provides need to be completely different. So coming up with a single definition of well-functioning government will not apply to all of these societies, all of these contexts. And if you go down to that smaller system, to a village, to a municipality, to a family, think of well-functioning government in a family, right? You can still think of the body, you can still think of how the family structures itself, how the family relates to each other, how the kids respect the parents or not, and how family issues are managed, how family decisions are made. That's a well-functioning government for the family. Even that can mean different things for different families.
Thank you.
Great, Michael. Thank you very much. And you've given us some great segues into what we're going to, well, less than an hour, but we'll cover some of these as we start to look at each of the 8 pillars of positive peace. We appreciate you sharing your wisdom with us, and it's great to be able to. One of the advantages of COVID, and there aren't many, but there are a few, is our discovery of Zoom and the ability to have people quite seamlessly from anywhere in the world join in. I must admit to myself, I've got confused over time zones a couple of times and shown up late or clicked on links early, but I appreciate it. You're welcome to stay for the rest of the hour, but I know you've got a train to catch back to New Jersey. So if you want to sign off or stay with us, you're more than welcome. But I really appreciate sharing with it. And it's great to go to the source rather than have it filtered through me. we really appreciate the work that IEP does. I know from the Rotary that uses your data a great deal in some of our developmental projects. It's good to have something very concrete to hang something on rather than somebody's opinion that we should do something, that we can point to some data to achieve something. So thanks for sharing your time with us today.
Thank you,
so much.
Chris, and thank you everybody for your questions. I mentioned in the beginning that the feedback element and the discussions are just so incredibly important for us to be able to develop better and better reports as we move forward. So it's been really invaluable for me. Look forward to staying in touch.
Thanks.
very much.
Thanks, Michael, very much. Take care. Best of luck to you.
Okay, well, I'm going to share my screen if I can find that and okay, well, that was it's more time than we intended, but we're very flexible with this, and that was there was good discussion there, so we didn't, and it really was a segue, and it covered some of the areas we were going to cover today in the next couple of sessions, so we can skim through some of those quite easy, and a great background for some of the topics. So last time we covered systems, and Michael referred to the systems and gave us some examples. When you work on one of those 8 pillars, it influences positively or negatively the other 8 pillars, and the danger of working on one in isolation, the talkie in the prison, and or the poppy growing fields, and there's probably multiple levels. If you just paid the farmers for the poppies, there may be influences on the middlemen and areas that could influence that. So important to keep in mind what we talked about last time, the systems approach. So let's take a look at those 8 pillars and play a little game. You may need to, if you're put it on a single view of a person, or so you can see the full screen if you need to. Let's look at the definitions of these. And this is a matching game. So well-functioning government, which letter there best describes well-functioning government? Anybody want to play the game?
Chris,
Yes.
I'll pick one.
Which one would, one matches with what letter?
Well, I would probably pick C.
Yep, yeah, probably, right. 2, equitable, not equal, equitable distribution of resources.
But there might be F would also probably come into it too.
Yeah, could do. Yeah. Equitable
Equitable distribution of resources.
I would put D.
D, economic.
Yep.
Yeah. H is what I'm looking for, so, but
Inclusion, opportunities, education.
free flow of information should be relatively easy to find.
B.
B, yeah. Good relations with neighbors.
E.
Yep, that one's right there. High levels of human capital. All the school teachers better get this one.
Has to be A.
Secondary schools, A.
You get an A. Acceptance of rights of others.
Have to be E, I guess.
Yeah.
Or G. No, G.
G.
G probably fits a little
G.
better. Low levels of corruption.
F.
Yep. And the final one, sound business environment.
D.
Only one left. Yeah. So those are the rough definitions of those 8, and we're going to start now working through them relatively slowly and look at each one. And you see some of the content, some of the reports, and we'll look at some of additional reports when we're looking at. Just to remind you, there's these 8 pillars of positive peace, and they're interconnected. Working on one without the others can have unintended consequences. Before we do that, resilience, which has become a sort of almost a buzzword, I think, in the last few years. It's a word we didn't hear very much, or we heard it more in a chemistry setting than human contact. But resilience has become a very important part of this. And I bring this up because it has the impact on positive peace. Positive countries that are positive peace, communities that are positive peace, family structures that are the elements of positive peace, all have greater resilience. Low positive peace, weak resilience, and you can see the different elements there that and you could probably come up. Does this model make sense? You know, the structure of the family, social, whether you're secular or religious, some of the beliefs, the education, the institutional, how society is organized, and then the attitudinals, what we believe, has a real impact on our resilience. And I, from a personal experience on a country level, I think of Haiti compared to New Zealand. Both had devastating earthquakes. Christchurch, and I was in Christchurch about 3 years after the earthquake. I think it was about 10 years ago, the earthquake, maybe a little bit less. And that beautiful cathedral downtown Christchurch fell down. Numerous buildings struck. Haiti, the same, more than 15 years ago or so. Haiti hasn't rebuilt. It's still a basket case, unable to come out of that, and not a resilient country. New Zealand, a resilient, modern, wealthy country. Christchurch is being rebuilt and coming out of it. That's the type of resilience. It's not just resilience from war, it can be resilience from other parts of it.
But Haiti started out as the poorest country in the world, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't it? So, you know, it started out without being equitable in terms of what New Zealand had to offer for its resilience, for its bounce back ability.
Yeah,
So
and
there's equitability needs to be also within the context of those other positive peace systems, I think.
yeah, and equity and equality are built into part of the positive peace. It's one of the elements, and you're certainly right. I think Haiti's the lowest income or lowest, standard of living in the Western Hemisphere. This graph simply shows this element of resilience, and positive peace increases resilience, negative peace decreases resilience. And more of a personal level, and using it, resilience as at this time of COVID. People sick, schools closed, or children home from school, physical distancing, all the challenges we're going through with COVID, compared to what we can ameliorate those with, supportive relationships. If you're, my neighbor's a single woman going through some physical health issues, and very isolated in her home. We try to connect with her, bring her some food, and do some various things. But even with the minimal contact we can have with her, she still is undergoing a great deal of stress that is exacerbated by COVID. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. This concept of resilience. Now, looking at resilience for organizations, this particular one, once again, our attitudes about resilience. Think of a government organization. Think of a strata council. A number of you, I live in a strata. Think of my strata council as a level of government, and how we manage the 50 townhouses in our strata. This can be, it's not just global governments or provincial governments or even city governments, it's organization. Think of any organizations, whether it's a golf club, a curling club, or what a religious organization you belong to. They all have some of these elements built into them on resilience. And I bring this up because as we work through these 8 pillars of positive peace, keep resilience in mind. The 2 underlying, it's a systems approach and resilience. And we'll repeat these over and over again, because those 8 pillars work in conjunction. They increase resilience and they work together. So let's start with the first one. Anybody want to try a definition of well-functioning government? I think the question was already asked. What's well-functioning government to you? What does it mean? Anybody want to try?
I guess Ron can start if he unmutes himself.
Just one word. What? I'm not looking for a definition. So one word when you think of a well-functioning government.
Rule of law.
Rule of law.
Lack of corruption.
Lack of corruption.
Trustworthy.
Trustworthy. Yeah.
I would say taking into account the needs of a variety of people who are being governed, the different communities, the different, whether they're ethnic groups or social economic groups.
Okay.
Representative.
Representative. Yep. Yep.
Listening to the people.
Listening to the people.
Responsible.
I would add effective management of resources for the greater benefit of most people in the society.
Yeah. And as we're thinking of, you think of it as a micro level, a family, a group, or as I say, any organization, not for profit or for profit organization you brought, or government levels, strata being a form of government that many of us live in. Local government, the city of Delta, province of British Columbia, Canada, the United Nations, global organizations we belong to. So that's it. And here's the definition, definition. Not the only definition, but the one IEP uses for their research.
I was going to say stability, but that isn't there, I know.
And I think Michael made a good point that the conflict, the attempted coup in Washington failed, if anything else, because of a stable government. Let's do a little case study. You're all belong to an organization interested in preventing human trafficking. You're organizing to stop sex trafficking or exploitation of people in whatever part of the world we're thinking of. And for the purpose of this, you're part of this organization. You're one of the organizers. You want to get this project going to reduce human trafficking.
Well, I think in the example of labor exploitation would be, first of all, the government's role to have, laws and rules to enable labor to be brought in when it's needed. I mean, we know here in Delta, crops need to be harvested, and most people who live in Delta don't really want to do that work. So we're dependent on migrant laborers. And fortunately, I think we have some reasonable rules and laws governing how they are treated, how they are housed, and how they are paid.
Okay, well-functioning government. So for our workers in our greenhouses that are coming from Mexico, Central America, we assume that there's some laws, federal, provincial, local, that governs their housing, their hours of work, conditions they work in, when they can go home, pay, and all the other things we expect from that.
Yeah, but all that is well, Chris, but for example, in Ontario during COVID, it was discovered that although they have similar rules as we have in BC, okay, there is no accountability, and many companies were exploiting their foreign workers incredibly bad.
So what does that tell us about a well-functioning government?
It needs accountability.
Yep. So just having the rules written, having a nice law written, if it isn't enforced or inspections aren't occurring, some way to check up on it. It's not, we can dismiss it as it's that part of the government, not the whole government, but that part of the government maybe isn't well functioned. So for our sex trafficking, exploitation of workers, we want the government to have some laws. What for the specific example we're talking about, what institutions would be involved? We're here in Canada. What levels of government or institutions would we want to be involved
I would think immigrant services.
Schools.
Sorry, immigrant services, and what was the other one?
Schools.
Schools, okay. So an educational aspect, if there's children of sex workers or young girls in the schools, and what do we want the school to do?
Well, and we need the police. They have the ability of identifying who the pimps are.
Okay, so we need the schools education and type of programs that young girls that this is wrong and to speak up. There's people that will help them if this is occurring. The police should be doing their role and enforcing it.
There should be social services also.
Social services involved to deal with the and if it's exploitation of nannies or work, the government agencies that look after workers, hours of work, to ensure their passports and things aren't being taken away from them, and they're working 7 days a week, 10 hours a day, that type of thing.
We have to have the systems of tracking. If you let and you have to work from the bottom up with local, like even things as simple as licensing and going around inspections, right up to very clear regulations that include individuals, potentially exploited individuals, in our what would you call it, labor standards, everything. You can't expect to create a group apart and not expect that there will be exploitation of them. It has to be at all levels that there's accountability.
And also lawyers.
Mm-hmm.
What about the idea that if there's a lot of trafficking or sex trafficking going on, is it more prevalent in a particular country because maybe there's a problem with the equitable distribution of resources? I don't know. I mean, I'm just coming out of this from nowhere. But I just wonder then is, when I think of crime, is it because there's some kind of a situation with poverty or income levels and all of that in the country to begin with.
Well, exactly. Why
And
are,
so,
yeah.
Mhm.
yeah, could they be a little more proactive and work from that end?
Mhm.
Like why is there sex tourism in Thailand?
Well, there's human trafficking in Canada as well.
Oh yeah,
Not
yeah.
like,
And I was also pointing out, Brenda, was going to point out, Brenda, that, for example, the correlation between trafficking humans and the traffic of drugs, because the people dependent on drugs sometimes feel into prostitution to sustain their habit.
Well, a classic example in our world is that is young people that have been in care, governmental care or supervision. They were falling off the map at 19 years old, and all of a sudden they had no support, no families, no allowance, nothing. And what were they going to do? If they're lucky, if they found a way to make it forward. But now they're talking about bridging those obvious gaps and having like a transition period where they, as they get into adulthood, to enable them to actually get their feet on the ground.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, the last part of that, how can you, if you're really passionate about the issue of this, the human trafficking, or passionate about exploitation of workers, what could you do?
forgive me, Chris, I'm not sure that I heard number 3 discussed. Did we?
No, we sort of
come to something?
drifted over it. We can back up. What would the government of Canada, the government of British Columbia gain if we were truly able to eliminate human trafficking?
Some integrity.
Integrity, anything else?
Oh, well, even
Sense
just
of
the amount,
morality.
the cost involved, even in resources and time.
Mhm.
I mean, if you could eliminate trafficking, my goodness, I mean, as they pointed out earlier, the cost of dealing with issues, that would be my guess.
So there's a cost, there's a health cost, there's a mental health cost. There's a drug addiction is really connected closely with human trafficking. You keep boys or girls, mostly girls, but some boys into human trafficking as sex workers by drug addiction. So that's there's correlations there. You know, there's altruistic reasons for a government that this is simply bad, it's evil, and it should be dealt with, but there's economic, any other gains for government?
Yeah, we could actually be teaching other governments how to eliminate their human trafficking.
Yep.
We could actually be a model and coaching and offer support and facilitation.
Yeah, it's difficult. You know, we can criticize Thailand for their sex tourism, but they can also point to Canada where exploitation is still going on. Pick up some of the newspapers and look at the ads, and you know, there's clearly prostitution being advertised in some of the newspapers.
Oh.
What at the heart of everything that I was reading and listening and thinking about is, I'm imagining it that everything we do as a human society has one group of people who have an idea of how things should be, wanting to impose those ideas on another group. And they make a bunch of laws. And one of the most dangerous and expensive and human degrading components of everything is the group of people who want to tell others what drugs they can and cannot use, leading to the drug trade. And I'm thinking of Mexico, that I lived in there 15 years and saw its economy go straight down like this, and it's still mired in corruption and drug dealing because there's no other equivalent viable economic activity for their youth to become involved with. So it's drugs if you want to get rich or think you're going to get rich. And I think even in Thailand, from everything I've read in documentaries, to keep people in sex trades, the only way they can do it is if they too drug themselves and, you know, just kind of close their minds to what they're doing.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to say something controversial now, because in Denmark, didn't they, with the sex trade, didn't they legalize the sex trade? I think it was Denmark.
Holland.
And
Holland.
Holland, thank you. And so, so it's government regulated.
And actually
I don't know.
Germany too.
That's not without issues. I recall in Amsterdam talking to a Dutch policeman, and my Western view the same. And he says, we spend as much police resources managing the legal trade that the women, the girls aren't too young, that they really are there voluntarily. They're not Eastern European, that they've been brought into Holland for the sex trade as nannies, and then they're in the sex trade, that they're, it's not, it sounds all nice, but it's not, it still takes a great deal of regulation. It's sort of like our, when marijuana was, cannabis was illegal, it was probably 4 or 5 pages of laws. Now that it is legal, the provincial regulations go into several books. Every city in British Columbia has pages of bylaws on it, and the regulation, probably one of those unintended consequences of things. But I'm not saying it. That's not something that shouldn't be tried. But we got to really, when we legalize something like the sex trade, are people really there voluntarily?
It's a problem.
Yeah. So
I'm thinking about the legalization of drugs. It seems to me that if, the street drugs were legalized, then they could be prescribed by doctors, and that way they're controlled through the pharmacies, and the drug manufacturers, all the manufacturing, the distribution would all be controlled, because we already have a very good system of distributing prescription medications. And it seems to me all these people who are dying of fentanyl, which is terrible, doesn't really have to happen as if these drugs were legalized. So I really don't, to me, it's like I don't understand why the government doesn't make moves towards doing that. I can't see, I can see what your point about the sex trade, but I can't see how that, how there would be unintended consequences of legalizing the drugs.
No, I guess there's political consequences, as there's a whack of people that are opposed to it. So just as cannabis legalization wasn't, it's probably higher accepted now that all the awful things that were supposed to happen never happened.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think the city of Vancouver is considering not treating people who are drug addicted as offenders, as legal offenders, but as though it's a health problem. And that may actually lead towards the legalization of a lot of the medications that they take.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so governments reacting with the governments, finding the right offices, number 4 there, lobbying with your the appropriate politician or government people in the right offices, whether it's labor standards for farm workers or visa controls for nannies coming into the country. Does somebody follow up when somebody gets a visa to come into Canada as a nanny? Are they work? And the sex trade, what are we doing? How do we control that? So that's it. Okay, the difference between government and good governments, and we've already touched on this. Thinking about good governments versus just government. Okay, some of the areas of good, and think of not just a national government. Once again, let me give you one example. Not the strata. When I lived in Vancouver, I lived in a townhouse, and our strata council got into difficulty because not following the rule of law. We had a very obnoxious owner in our strata. Every strata is required to have one obnoxious person living there. I don't know. It's something we all have them. We hope they're not too disruptive, but this fellow is very disruptive. So they decided to start enforcing the bylaws, which sounds reasonable. And of course, they had a bylaw against bird feeders, and he was fined for having a bird feeder. Trivial to get at him. But what they hadn't done is find probably the other half of the owners in there that had bird feeders. They weren't following the rule of law that you have to apply it equally. He was fined for having a bird feeder, and numerous other people, including me, and that had a bird feeder that weren't being fined, and he started, and they had to, back off. So even at the strata level, that rule of law is critical, that you can't enforce something on somebody unless it's equally enforced on everybody.
Chris, I wanted to piggyback on something somebody
Sure.
else said before, that really one of the issues of colonialism is to impose that this is what is right and this is how it should be done. And
Yep.
other governments don't particularly think so all the time. The term good seems to be along the same lines. Like what we consider to be good, maybe in one strata, another strata would not consider to be good. So I wonder if there's a better term, I don't know, useful or productive or healthy or functional.
Yeah.
I don't know, other than the word good.
Well,
Good,
Brenda, and
Mhm.
you had hit it in the nail there, because what happens is we, in that case, for example, good governance for that strata council was punish the culprit, punish the guy instead of looking for a solution. And I think good governance is looking for or working towards a solution.
Well, you
and
see what
even better, working towards a resolution.
Yeah, and if I think about it, we did a course on Indigenous culture. This kind of punishment would never exist in Indigenous culture.
No.
What I think you could substitute the word good with agreed governance.
Yep.
If it's a set of laws that everybody agrees or the majority agree on, then you're going to have more success.
Yeah. Yep. So various ways, even good governments can give us. But look at these. How about some of the other points there? Accountable. Think of the city of Delta. Does it meet all those criterias?
No.
Criteria? Which ones wouldn't you think it wouldn't meet?
Not yes or no, to a certain degree, some more than others, I guess is what it is.
Not always on consensus oriented. Many times the council imposed its view,
Not
right or
always
wrong.
transparent.
Sorry?
Not always transparent.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure.
And I'm thinking accountable in terms of, I'm thinking about the recycling. The city recently changed their recycling rules, and what I don't know that they're being accountable or even taking cognizant of the repercussions of that change, which means that there's an awful lot of different types of plastics that no longer go into those blue bins. And so they're going into the garbage now. And because the only other alternative is to take it to the return it center. And how many people take all the excess plastic to the return it? Very few, I think. So this is one of my pet peeves, is that I don't understand the change, and I'd like more accountability. If there were more hours in the day, I would have a letter written off to the mayor and council. In fact, I probably will do that eventually.
Think about these same, from not just the city of Delta, any organizations you belong to. Guillermo and I could think of our Rotary Club. Do we meet this criteria in all of this and govern in our Rotary Club, or any other clubs or charitable groups you belong to? So it's and some of them are defined by us. Efficiency, the people running the city may think they're very efficient, and because we're affected, we don't see it. Transparent is if I know about it, they're being very transparent. If I discovered I didn't know about it, they're not transparent. So often in the way we see that. But think about this when we work through these different types of that. I'm watching the time here.
I think it's really important to listen to the people.
Yep.
Whether the politicians rule us or whether the people do.
Responsiveness.
To really listen to the people is important. There's one of the 26 cantons in Switzerland that still votes by putting their hand up, and they listen to the people totally. They don't listen to the politicians. They do what the people want about roads going through or whatever it is.
Yep. Yep.
I think there needs to be, generally speaking, more listening.
Yep. Yeah, sometimes listening is also, they didn't do what I wanted. We sometimes hear that on news stories where people are criticizing a decision. There was a number of community meetings and votes on things, but they didn't listen because they didn't do what I wanted them to do. So
well, yeah, there's some of that.
Yeah, but we gotta balance that out between.
Yeah, you do.
The different ways. Let's do one more of these pillars of if we before we finish for the day. High levels of human capital. Anybody want to try a definition of this one? Any school teachers?
Well, high levels of literacy and numeracy.
Yep. Yep.
I think allowing people who may not be academic to actually use their skills in the most productive way they can, so that we don't lose sight of people who don't have the language that is mainly dominant, or people who don't have the regular capacities that are accepted as what is called typical. So atypical people also be included within human capital.
Okay, so this is one of the 8 pillars of positive peace. Human capital, higher it is, better educated your population, more you accommodate everybody, more positive peace. More you lower your level of these, and you can understand how the lower level of education finding it difficult to deal with governments, finding it difficult to work in the society.
But is it beyond high levels of education, Chris? For example, a woodworker in Canada or a lumberjack in Canada is considered a middle-class occupation. If you do the same job in Latin America, okay, you are very low on the social peg, and therefore your aptitudes and your skills are not valued the same way. And I think what characterizes the developed countries is the fact that there is a certain equality in the acceptance that we have. Some sets of skills are as valued as others, okay? And if you are a doctor in philosophy with umpteen titles published, but you cannot operate your water heater, okay, then you value the plumber.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so how we value trades, how we value occupations, how we value professions, and we know culturally that's different from around the world. As you know, I keep referring to the policing background. For a long time, the Vancouver Police had difficulty recruiting from certain cultures because policing was seen as a not a good trade. They're having your son or your daughter become a police officer. They had failed the family. So recruiting from certain ethnic groups, certain cultures was always a challenge. And then you face the challenge of being criticized. You're not representative of the community. So this double edge. So you'll see most of the Asian police officers in the RCMP or the municipal police are second or third generation. The first generation, those cultural norms are still pressure on them once they've gone to second generation schooling. They've changed, or their families have changed in it. The former Jim Chu, the former chief of the Vancouver Police, though he was born in China, grew up here and raised here, didn't speak Mandarin or Cantonese well because of that. But it was seen, very important to have an Asian chief of the Vancouver Police. So Jim did well in his policing career. But a difficult cultural norms at various times.
Now, Chris, do you have some assignments for us for next Thursday?
Yes, I'll send you out the other. I'll send you the report. We've done the positive peace report. Michael referred to the global peace index. That's the other side of it, the report. I'll send that out to you. I'll send it to Guillermo and get him to send it out to you. And let me just stop this. I'll send that out to you. Take a look at that. There's also a new economic, you referred to the cost, and I think the economic one just came out, 2021. Once again, it's an economic report, so it goes into crunches lots of numbers. But take a look at, once again, the executive summary, and you can look at various other parts of it. If you really like economy, or if you really like to understand why they say how many $1 trillion violence costs, that report can do it. And there were some questions on other parts of aspects of such as suicide and that, and you'll see that referenced in this report, the Global Peace Index. So great.
Well, thank you very much, Chris. I think this has been a very interesting session, and thank you for bringing also that guest speaker that was Tops. And we have had a very lively discussion, and that's very good. That was the point of having you as a presenter.
Good. Enjoy your week, and it looks like good weather in South Delta, and enjoy the weather. See you next week.
Okay. Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. And if you have any suggestion, don't hesitate to send me an email.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.